Hey everyone, SunTide here. Hope you all are doing great. Today we're going to continue our coverage of Monster Hunter Wilds Title Update 2 and start talking about the cool new weapons and the new weapon skills that they added to the base patch. I think it's pretty cool and interesting because this time, although they introduced 2 monsters, they introduced 4 new weapon skills, which is a lot more weapon skills than they usually introduce for that many monsters. So the Lagiacrus Weapons now have the new skill Convert Thunder Resistance, which is really cool for element damage. And the Seregios weapons have 3 new skills. So the Blade Master weapons, the melee weapons, get a new skill Bladescale Honing. The Gunner weapons get Bladescale Loading. And in addition to that, the bow guns also get the skill Evading Reload. So the bow guns get 2 new skills, which is pretty cool. So yeah, we're going to talk about each of them in turn, but we're going to start off first with Lagiacrus Weapons and the new skill Convert Thunder Resistance, which is really cool. So right now you can see on screen the description of the new skill Convert Thunder Resistance, which says that it increases our weapon's element attack proportional to our thunder resistance. So yeah, this skill is actually pretty simple. You can see that right now my thunder attack is 400. If I leave the pause screen and I check my stats, it goes up to 440. You can see that my thunder resistance is plus 10, so basically I just get 4 times my resistance as thunder attack. Really simple, but really good. In practice right now, for a lot of your raw focus builds, that's going to be something like plus 100 thunder just for free. The reason for that is that right now AT Ray Dao is probably the best armor set, and each piece gives plus 4 res. So if you get 4 pieces or 3 pieces, you're getting plus 12, plus 16. In addition, when you eat food, like I did right now, you get plus 10 thunder res. So yeah, that's already going to be like 22, 26. Multiplied by 4, that's around 100 thunder attack, which is really good. And if you really try, you can probably get up to 200. So the main way you get that is basically with the Thunder Resistance skill. So if you get 3 points of Thunder Res, that's plus 20 Thunder Res or plus 80 Thunder Attack, which is really high. Even if you just use like one slot for Thunder Res, that's plus 6 Thunder Res or plus 24 Thunder Attack, which is really nice. That's like almost as much as Thunder Attack 1. So yeah, Thunder Res is actually really strong with this piece of equipment. There are other ways you can get more thunder resistance, so the skill Element Absorption boosts your element attack, but it also boosts your elemental resistance depending on what weapon you have. If you use this weapon, you get extra thunder res depending on your level of element absorption. So if you have 3 points of element absorption, you boost your element attack thanks to element absorption, but you also boost your thunder res by 8, which gives you another 32 thunder attack. So it gets your thunder attack just really high, really fast. Those are going to be your main 2 ways of boosting your thunder res and therefore your thunder attack. But there are other ways. So the skill defense boost, if you get it to high enough levels, boost your res by a bit, but it's really hard to get up that high. And Uthuna's cover conditionally grants plus 12 res, and that's possibly a bit relevant because the new AT Uthuna is coming and probably has the same set bonus. But unfortunately, that skill also reduces your thunder res by -3, so it just balances out, so you aren't going to be using Uthuna's cover, but Thunder Res, Element Absorption are going to be very good, and if you just want to max out for the sake of maxing out, you can get Defense Boost as well. But yeah, basically you should probably expect 100 without even trying, and then up to 200 if you really try to boost your Thunder Attack via this skill. So yeah, that basically makes it pretty good in general, but how good it actually is depends on your weapon type. The reason for that is that different weapons actually have very different numbers, not just how they actually, are played and how much damage they do. The actual stat number changes depending on the weapon. So, for example, if you consider the Artian Greatswords, when you first craft them, they have 480 visible element, and whenever you get an element reinforcement, it goes up by 80, which means you can have an Artian Greatsword with 800 thunder attack. The dual blades, they start off with 270 and increase by 20 every level, so you can only get up to 350. So you can imagine how every point of thunder attack is worth way more purely by these numbers for the dual blades than it is for the greatsword. There's one more thing to it as well, though. So what they've usually tried to balance it by doing is they've also changed the numbers of skills. So for example, Burst 5 gives you 200 element to the greatsword, but only 120 element to the dual blades. So they sort of usually balance the skills around this as well. They did not do this for Convert Element Resistance, which I think is really cool and actually really good. Because what that means is that these low element stat weapons, like the dual blades, sword and shield, switch axe, and insect glaive, get way more from this skill than the weapons that have higher element stats. Things like the greatsword, the hunting horn, the hammer, or the gun lance. So yeah, basically this is a nice element skill for element weapons that have the lower numbers, which I think is cool. So dual blades finally get a good thing, so do the other element weapons. So yes, unfortunately it's not all good news. So one, your bonus thunder you get from this skill is not boosted by Thunder Attack 3. So Thunder Attack 3 gives like a nice multiplier, I believe 20% or so. The extra bonus thunder you get from this skill is not boosted by that, so you're getting a bit less thunder than you may expect. The other is the element cap. So, if you don't know about it, there is an element cap in the game. Your element stat can get no higher than some particular values, and that value depends on the actual weapon's element stat, whatever's actually based on the weapon without any other skills. The element cap is whichever is higher, your base element plus 350, or your base element times 1.9. So my element based on the weapon is 400, so 400 times 1.9 is going to be 780, I believe? 760? 760, I think it is. 400 times 1.9. 760, yes. Okay. Which means that I can only get another 360 elements before I cap out, and no other element attack is going to be worth it. Normally, this was very hard to reach, but because of this skill, it's actually very possible. If you think about it, you're getting something like 100 plus from Thunder Attack 3, you're getting 150 or so from this skill, and then if you count skills like Element Absorption, Burst, you can quite easily hit that element cap if you focus too hard on element. So yeah, that's the sort of balancing factor. Your sort of maximum damage you can do is lower, but it's easier to get to that maximum damage. Now, exactly how good it is though depends on how good the weapons are. If you have really good skill on a weak weapon, then it's not going to be good overall. Luckily, the Lagiacrus weapons are all very, very, very good. Insanely good, I would say. I'm actually surprised at how good they made them. So, the raw damage for all the Lagiacrus weapons are going to be 220, with the one exception of the hunting horn, which has 230. This is really, really good. The affinity is going to be 0. Average, your slot's going to be 3, 2, and 1. It's like that for basically all crafted weapons, so that's also pretty standard. However, your sharpness values are really, really, really high. So it ranges from 60 for the greatsword and hammer up to 90 for the dual blades, which is just really good. The longsword, most of them are going to be around 70 or 80, but yeah, that's very, very high. Oftentimes you will not need any more sharpness skills, which is very nice because it has less slots than an Artian weapon. So yeah, that's really cool. And the element values are also all pretty good. They range from 25 for the dual blades and bow up to 55 for the greatsword. These are the true values. You can multiply these by 10, so 250 to 550. So yeah, very good element stats, very good sharpness, and pretty good everything else. So overall, it's really, really nice. But not only that, they have really good skills. Not just come with thunder resistance, but they also come with 2 points of another skill, which seems to be specifically chosen for the weapon, and all of them are really good. Some of them are mediocre, so for example, the longsword gets power up longer too, which does help us stay in red for longer, but for example, the sword and shield and the gun lance get offensive guard too, which is really good. Greatsword gets focus too, so yeah, some are winners, some are losers, but even the losers, still appreciate what they've got. Because of this, that also reduces some of the slots that are needed and means that you can use your fewer slots than you would have for an Artian weapon on actual damage and stuff like that. So if you compare the Lagiacrus weapons to a specifically raw-focused Artian weapon, you basically lose 5 raw and 5 affinity and some slots, but what you gain? You gain a whole load of sharpness, you gain a lot of element, and you get some decent skills to make up for the loss of slots. Which is, honestly, like a really good trade-off. So if you compare this instead to an element-optimized Artian weapon, so with 3 raw boosting parts using the creation, 4 reinforcements for element, and 1 reinforcement for sharpness, you still lose your 5 affinity, you still lose your slots, you also have a lower element cap. However, in exchange, you get 15 raw, which is really, really good. You still get your massive sharpness, and you still get your nice, decent skills. The element value changes, though, and that's pretty interesting. So, if you take into account the extra 100 thunder you get from thunder resistance, you actually usually have the same element as an element optimized Artian weapon. So they're basically just as good, but they can be pushed even further if you put in skills like thunder resistance and stuff like that for most weapons. The greatsword specifically, you never seem to be able to hit the same highs. You lose about 100 or 150 thunder attack compared to the Artian thunder greatsword with maxed out element. So that one loses out, but everything else seems to be a winner. So yeah, basically it's easier to get higher values, but the highest values you can ever reach just because of the element cap. But yeah, so overall, with regards to Lagiacrus weapons, I would say that they are very good thunder weapons. Versus the raw weapons, you get massive amounts of element of sharpness in exchange for some raw. Versus the thunder weapons, you get a massive amount of raw, sharpness, and it's easier to get good elements, but you lose out on some element caps. So basically, it's a bit worse at raw than the raw Artian weapons, and a bit worse at element than the element Artian weapons, but like better, way better at what they're bad at. So it's almost the best of both worlds, and thus I would say, I'm pretty sure that these are going to be your best thunder weapons for most weapons, for most situations. Haven't done the math fully, but so far that definitely seems to be the case. Okay, and let me show you what I mean in practice. So right now my build is a very high raw optimized build with 4 radal pieces. I just slotted in 3 pieces of thunder res, and I'm using a optimized Artian raw weapon with Mind's Eye in this case. My Heaven's Thunder, my Lagiacrus weapon, has the bolt skill, so thunder attack 3 along with 3 crit. If I get to red and I do say my Spirit Blade 1, you'll see that I do there's red right now. You'll see that I do 121 damage on a crit. I think with some burst on. If I change this to my new Lagiacrus weapon, and I get back to red, which I will do now, how much damage will I do on a crit with my Spirit Blade, this highly raw focused damage? I do 141 damage. So that's crazy. One other thing though is if I pause the screen, you will see that my element is orange. It has maxed out, hit the cap at 760 thanks to burst, so it's going to run out. And yeah, so this is what I mean by it becomes very easy to hit the cap with this weapon if you stack your thunder is high enough. But the damage is so much higher when you hit the cap. You can do a full raw optimized build outside of that, still hit the cap, and get some crazy element damage and some crazy raw damage at the same time. So yeah, a very strong weapon, very cool, and very nice skill. So, that's it about the Lagiacrus weapons. Let's move on to talk about the Seregios weapons and the new skill, Bladescale Honing. So the main description, what it says right now, is it narrowly evading a monster's attack while your weapon is drawn, grants you special sharpness. This is also pretty straightforward and a pretty clear description. So if I pull out my weapon and I get this thing to attack me and I dodge it at the right time, you're going to see that I will eventually, first try, have this sort of orange effect on my weapon sharpness, and what that does is it gives me a nice boost of damage. It sort of overwrites my current sharpness and instead gives me a 40% damage increase, which is very nice. And it lasts a different amount depending on your weapon type. So the longsword it lasts 4 hits. For most weapons it lasts 4 hits, but the gun lance and lance last 5 hits, and the sword and shield dual blades it lasts 6 hits, which is pretty cool. But there are some caveats. So, one, the wide sharpness already does a 1.32 times multiplier, so it's only around 60% extra when you get Bladescale Honing up. So it's still a lot better, but it's not 40% better, because that would be ridiculous. The other weird thing is that extra sharpness does not refresh if you've used all of it. So for example, if I try and get the skill up again without failing, there I am. So now I have it. If I use up half of it, and I try and dodge again, you'll see that I will not be able to activate the skill again. See, I dodged it perfectly, but I still only have half of my sharpness. So it does not refresh unless I've used all of it, then I can roll again and activate the skill again. Well, not that time, but eventually I'll be able to activate the skill again. One more thing is that extra sharpness skills, the extra sharpness ignores other skills. So things like Razor Sharp, Master's Touch, Protective Polish, and even Bludgeoner have no effect when this skill is up. So yeah, basically what you get is what you get. You get 4, you get 5, or you get 6 for the most part. Well, there are some other really cool things about this. So one, special dodges work. So with the longsword, for example, I can use a 4-side slash, and with the 4-side slash, I will get the extra bonus, which is cool. One weird thing is that some attacks use partial sharpness. So you might know that dual blades, when they attack with both weapons, it's only worth 1 sharpness. 2 hits, 1 sharpness. A lot of attacks that are 3 hits in one attack each use 30% of your sharpness. And 3 times 30% is 90%. So you still have this extra 10% sliver left. What I mean by that is if I use, say, for example, the Spirit Blade 3, which is 3 hits, that only uses 90% of a single sharpness hit, which means if I do other attacks, you can see I have this tiny sliver of sharpness remaining. So instead of getting like 4 extra attacks, I'll get a 5th free extra attack if I use a 3-hit attack like I did just there, which I think is pretty cool. And one last extra nice thing is that the extra sharpness stays after I swap weapons. So I swapped to my heavy bowgun right now. If I swap back to my longsword, you can still see I have that extra little sliver, and so I get a nice big attack with the extra special sharpness with my next hit. Probably not so good for the longsword, but if you, for example, use the greatsword, you could have, for example, a backup Seregios greatsword roll early on to get the extra bonus on attack, and whenever you get like downtime, if say the monster's asleep, you could just slam it with a Bladescale Honed boosted 2-charge slash or something like that. Probably not practical, but it is pretty cool. And I think that's honestly my rough idea behind this skill. The thing is that this skill is, on the face of it, really, really good. Having 60% extra damage, even conditionally, is very nice, and having reduced sharpness usage is even better. You know, if this skill was a 3-slot skill, it would go on basically every build. We'd all just get very good at dodging. We'd use this instead of Master's Touch and get more damage for it. But it depends on weapon stats, and unfortunately, compared to the Lagiacrus Weapons, these skills are quite a bit weaker. Most of them only have 210 raw. For some reason, Gunlance has 220 raw, which is much worse than Artian Weapons 225. The 210 at least. 220 is pretty close. They do have high affinity at 25, which is good. Their slots are the same as most of them at 321. However, they do have a lot less sharpness than other weapons. So the greatsword has 10, but most of them have 20 or 30, which is not great. You also have only the skill Bladescale Honing, so no other skills, and you have no element or anything like that. So yeah, pretty mediocre overall, except for the extra affinity. So if you compare that to an Artian weapon, for example, you lose 15 raw, which is massive. You lose slots, which is really bad. You lose 40 to 80% of your sharpness, which is also really bad. But you do get Bladescale Honing, and you get 20 affinity, so that's something. But how good is the comparison? Well, okay. So on the screen right now, I plotted the comparison, Seregios Weapon versus Artian, assuming you have, say, 40 raw from, Adrenaline Rush, Counter-Strike, other stuff, and you have Crit Boost 3. So if you compare the Artian weapon to Seregios Weapon, I assume you go 100 hits, and I assume you use one of the weapons that have 20 wide sharpness. On the x-axis, I've plotted your affinity if you have the Artian weapon. On the y-axis, I've plotted the uptime with Bladescale Honing. And roughly what you can see is that you need about 50% uptime for the Seregios weapon to be worth it. And having 50% uptime is very, very hard. If you think about it, you have 4 hits where you have your higher damage, and then since it doesn't refresh, you can't dodge during those 4 hits. You basically need to do the 4 hits, and then you get another dodge within the next 4 hits for this skill to break even in terms of raw damage. And that's, if you don't overcap your affinity, which you might, because 25 affinity is a lot, and that's excluding element damage or status damage. If you get even like 1 paralysis, or you have like a tiny bit of fire damage, the Artian weapon is going to push way past what the Seregios weapon could use. So, yeah, basically, it's really hard to get the high damage, and even if you do, you aren't really getting benefited from it by any means. So it's not really competitive compared to the Artian weapons normally. I'm sure that there are probably some very good, very funny, like niche or meme builds that are good, particularly if you use Adrenaline Rush or Evasion Mantle, both of which also boost your damage after you dodge. So for example, I can probably imagine, say, a hit and run Greatsword, where you're just rolling all of the time and, you know, making up for that one good opportunity to get an attack, which will now be boosted by Bladescale Honing along with all the other evasion skills. Or Airborne Longsword, if you're really good at countering. So, for example, your Crimson Spinning Slash and your Foresight Whirl all get boosted by Airborne, so you can use that. You can use Adrenaline Rush, you can use Evasion Mantle, you can use Bladescale Honing, and get massive damage on your Crimson Spinning Slashes, for example. Could be really fun builds, could be, you know, actually useful, but probably not a good meta choice for most users, unfortunately. So, yes, unfortunately that's going to be the case for the Seregios Blade Master weapons. However, the Gunner weapons and the Gunner skill is a very different story. So, Bladescale Loading, the skill you get for the Gunners, seems very similar at first. Basically has the same description. You narrowly avoid a monster's attack when your weapon is drawn, and you get special loaded ammo or applied coatings. So if I get this weapon equipped, let's swap back, and let's try and pull out my weapon and dodge. So what that's going to do is I will dodge, and I will get... and I will fail, I will get hit. But you'll see that I will get 3 extra nice ammo, and this is actually very, very strong. So if I get critical range and I get some nice damage on this, you'll see I do 82.9 on a non-crit. And if I use my normal ammo, I only do 59.2 damage. So this is actually a full 40% damage bonus for the bow guns. So yes, 40% is absolutely crazy. This works for the normal ammo, the pierce ammo, and the spread ammo for the bowguns. The other ones don't seem to get benefited, and they all have the same sort of clip. So if I use the Bladescale on normal, I can't use it on pierce, and has the same restrictions. So if I dodge again with this up, it's not going to get refreshed. So yeah, I can never get it unless I use all of it. The bows, it can be used on all ammo, but only boost damage by 25%, which is still a crazy amount. So yeah, much higher numbers than Bladescale Honing, and because of that, it becomes much, much better. 25 or 40% compared to 6%, it's not a day difference, and it basically means that these are really, really good for raw damage. But yeah, otherwise identical mechanics, so you can use your special dodges as well, and it works for other bow coatings if you want to use like the para coating decoration or something. You can use it with para jewels. But it doesn't seem to boost your status amounts, at least to my testing. I could be wrong here, but for at least for my tested, I couldn't get status faster. It just boosts your damage 25% as well, which sort of means it's a waste because you could just use close range coating and get more damage that way. But yeah, getting 25% of 40% damage is really good, and actually insane. In addition to that, the bowguns also get another extra skill, and that is evading reload. So all evading reload does is when I roll, even if I'm not dodging attack, I get an extra bit of ammo in my clip. So you might have seen that there. So for example, I can use this. I can use all of my ammo. When I roll, I get an extra bit of ammo there. So 2, 3, 4. It only works on whatever you have equipped. So if I use my trank ammo, I swap to my demon ammo, and I roll with my demon ammo, you can see the demon ammo refreshes, but the trank ammo does not. And yeah, so this also works underneath the extra ammo you get from Bladescale Honing. So you can see that I have 1 plus 3. I rolled and I got the extra recovery from evade reloading, plus the 3 ammo I got from Bladescale Loading, which is great. I'd also need to do some cool things, like you basically just never reload if you dodge between every attacks. So you can see right now, I have 2 ammo, I have 1 ammo, and I can just roll, shoot, roll, shoot, roll, shoot, and just never have to reload, which is something. So yeah, evading reload, also really, really good skill, and combined with Bladescale Loading, which is a 40% damage bonus, it's actually just crazy. So yeah. I'm not a gunner, but to my understanding, the high numbers of Bladescale Loading plus the extra bonus of evading reload means that these seem like a very, very strong raw options, so long as you are decent at dodging. You don't even need to be like really good at dodging like you need to be with the Bladescale Weapons. As long as you get a few dodges every now and then, 40% damage for your next 3 hits is crazy, you know? So yeah, pretty cool. So basically to close this off, summary conclusions, I would say that Convert Thunder Resistance, which you get on Lagiacrus Weapons, it's a pretty good skill on very, very good weapons. So they become just a top tier Thunder option whenever a monster is Thunder weak. Bladescale Honing, so the skill you get from the Bladescale Weapons from Seregios, are a very good skill, but the weapons are a bit mediocre. So they only become overall just a funny side option, not really meta in most situations. However, Bladescale Loading, much better. Evade Reload, also really good. So even if they are on mediocre weapons, the skills are just so good, almost busted, that I would say they become top tier raw weapons. So yes, that would basically be it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching and sticking through to the end. Next video will either be builds or unofficial TU2 patch notes. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all so much to my Patreons. Feel free to join my Patreon if you have spare money. And yeah, see you all next one. Bye.